Did you know that you can sue for millions of dollars for a disputed missing pair of trousers, or pants as it is also called? Yes, this happened not too long ago in a United States lawsuit. If you do bring such a lawsuit, whether you then go on to win, or lose the case is of course another matter entirely. In this video, we will refer to the case as the missing trousers case. Want to know 11 things that made the entire affair so incredible and shocking? For instance, how many millions of dollars were actually claimed as damages? And did the claimant eventually win the lawsuit, or not? Were the trousers involved even missing at all? Continue watching the video to find out. For the narration and dramatization of this video, note the disclaimers that the names of real people involved in the missing trousers case have not been used, and some details of the actual events have been reworked. Some perspectives and scenarios are also given. Sit back and relax, as we take you on the intriguing journey of the missing trousers case that has been widely reported, both in the United States and internationally, in print and online media, as well as other sources. This epic case also had a few offshoot cases, the last of which eventually ended a whole 15 years after the trousers allegedly went missing. Hopefully, no other lawsuits related to it will occur in the future. The saga of the missing trousers case began in the mid-2000s. A customer, whom also happened to be an officer of court that we'll call the chancellor, took his pair of too tight trousers for alteration to a dry cleaner's store that was within walking distance of his home. He needed the trousers altered because he wanted to wear a nice outfit to his first day of work at his new job on the bench. The trousers in question were the pants, the bottom part, of a suit owned by the chancellor, and were one of a series of trousers he had recently dropped off at the dry cleaner's store for alteration. We'll call the dry cleaner's store Heaps Dry Cleaners, a business owned and operated by 3 people, whom we'll call the Heaps. The Heaps were immigrants and did not speak fluent English, and sometimes, they used interpreters. The Heaps also had other dry cleaning stores. On the drop-off day, Heaps Dry Cleaners accepted the trousers for alteration from the chancellor, and issued him with a dry cleaning bill of $10.50 for the alteration of the trousers. To understand this story better, it is crucial to keep 3 amounts in mind to compare and contrast against one another, and to try to make some sense out of them. The first amount to remember is this dry cleaning bill of $10.50 for the alteration of the trousers, while the second amount to remember will be the potential cost of replacement of the disputed missing trousers with a new suit. The third amount to remember is the damages amount claimed by the chancellor in relation to the disputed missing trousers. We will soon come to these last 2 amounts in this story. A few days after dropping off the trousers, the chancellor returned to Heaps Dry Cleaning to pick it up. However, after a search, the Heaps could not locate the trousers. The Heaps said that after being worked on at that location, the trousers had possibly been mistakenly sent to another of the Heaps Dry Cleaning stores. On the following day, the trousers were again not located. Ultimately, less than 2 weeks after the trousers were dropped off, the Heaps had supposedly now found the chancellor's misplaced trousers, which they confirmed according to their records and receipt tags. The found trousers were gray in color, with unusual belt loops, or inserts, which one of the Heaps said they distinctly recalled seeing when working on the alteration of the chancellor's trousers that were dropped off. The belt loops, or inserts, were elastic waist inserts used to expand the size of the waistband of the trousers. Great news, right? You would think so, but no. Upon being presented with the found trousers by the Heaps, the chancellor disputed that this were not his gray trousers with blue and burgundy pinstripes that he allegedly dropped off for alteration. In fact, the chancellor stated that, with one exception in his adult life, he had never worn trousers with cuffs, and the gray trousers presented by the Heaps had cuffs. So, the chancellor refused to accept the found trousers. Based on the feedback he kept getting from the Heaps, the chancellor concluded that his trousers were permanently lost, and he afterwards demanded $1,150 for a new suit. Recall the second amount you are to remember? Well, it is this potential cost of $1,150 for a new suit to replace the disputed missing trousers. Also keep in mind the first amount of $10.50 for the dry cleaning bill for the alteration of the trousers already mentioned. These figures become relevant later on to better put things into perspective. When the Heaps refused the Chancellor's demand for $1,150 for a new suit, the Chancellor subsequently sued the Heaps for losing his trousers by bringing a legal action in court. In the lawsuit, the Chancellor ultimately claimed an amount of $67 million as damages in relation to the disputed missing trousers. This is the third amount you are to remember. $67 million as damages. Despite efforts by the Heaps later to settle the missing trousers case prior to trial, the Chancellor continued with the case. Following the trial, the Chancellor lost the case at the trial court, and his subsequent motion to the trial court to reconsider was also denied. He went on to appeal to the Court of Appeals, and the three-judge panel that heard the matter rejected his appeal. He then filed a petition for the entire nine-judge Appellate Court of Appeals to rehear the case, but his petition was denied. With the basic facts of the missing trousers case now known and digested, 11 incredible and shocking things contributed to the case becoming infamous, and made it difficult sometimes to separate fact from fiction. 1. The subject matter of the lawsuit, disputed missing trousers, was by its very nature, remarkable. Trousers, seriously? A commonplace and innocuous item, usually. It was astonishing that a court proceeding was brought at all for such a claim, and that the court even entertained the matter. 2. The system of court at which the claim was brought was bewildering. The claim was for a matter that involved, at its core, relatively modest amounts. Yet, it was filed at a superior court that usually handles major value litigation, with complicated rules and procedures, that can take a longer time to conclude, and that can be more expensive. Remember, the disputed missing trousers could potentially have been replaced with a new suit of $1,150, and also, the dry cleaning bill issued for alteration was for only $10.50. Therefore, if this claim should rightly have been brought at all, arguably, it should not have been brought at the Superior Court, but to the Small Claims Court, which would have been a better venue for the lawsuit. The Small Claims Court typically handles matters that do not involve large amounts of money, and it uses simplified rules and procedures for quick and inexpensive resolution. Clearly, it was the monstrous damages amounts claimed by the Chancellor that shot the litigation into the higher jurisdiction of the Superior Court. It has been said that the Heaps were forced to endure a major litigation that more properly belonged in Small Claims Court. Considering that the case arose from a claim that dry cleaners had lost a pair of trousers that involved relatively modest amounts, the case was excessive, resource-intensive, voluminous, and protracted, especially given the Chancellor's aggressive approach in the discovery phase, during the court proceedings. 3. Despite different efforts to settle this matter, the persistence and obstinacy of the Chancellor to pursue this matter to court and to trial were also surprising. Along the way in this contentious dispute, 3 different offers of settlement in the amounts of $3,000, $4,600, and $12,000 were made by the Heaps to the Chancellor for the disputed missing trousers, all of which were rejected by the Chancellor. Even a law association body offered to buy the Chancellor a suit of his choice. But the Chancellor continued with the case. 4. While a few of the Chancellor's court claims were ordinary, the nature of some of the claims were quite peculiar and extensive. The Chancellor's claims against the Heaps were amended as time went on, and were for things like the following. The cost of a new suit to replace the disputed missing trousers, with the disputed missing trousers valued at $800. $2 million for mental suffering, inconvenience, and discomfort. $15,000 for the next 10 years, for weekend car rental costs of going to separate dry cleaners. $10,000, payable within 24 business hours, for ongoing services from Heaps dry cleaners, if the Chancellor notified them that they were not providing him with acceptable service, and $500,000 for attorney fees, even though the Chancellor represented himself in this matter as his own attorney. The Chancellor also claimed against the Heaps for the supposed failure by the Heaps to honor 3 alleged misleading business signs. These signs, all work done on premises, same-day service, and satisfaction guaranteed, were hung at Heaps dry cleaners store location. The Chancellor also requested punitive damages to be used by other unhappy consumers to claim against local businesses. Few. 5. Some legal arguments adopted by the Chancellor during the court trial were also eyebrow-raising. For instance, the Chancellor argued that the satisfaction guaranteed business sign of Heap's dry cleaners was an unconditional and unlimited warranty of satisfaction given by the Heaps to a customer, as determined solely by the customer, whether reasonable or not. Therefore, he said that the Heaps were required to honor any claim by any customer. In other words, based on this satisfaction guaranteed business sign, the Chancellor was of the view that the Heaps were required to do whatever a customer determined would make the customer satisfied, whether this ended up being reasonable or not. But how could this possibly work out in the real world if the Chancellor's argument represented the true position of the law? There would be no end in sight as to what customers would require business owners to do in order for customers to be satisfied. Even witnesses with unsatisfying experiences with Heap's dry cleaners testified at the court trial that they would have been satisfied with reimbursement only for the value of their clothes that were damaged or lost by Heap's dry cleaners. Even if they would have wanted compensation, they did not allude to deserving millions of dollars, whether for inconvenience or for being unsatisfied with their transactions with the Heaps. Both the trial court and the Court of Appeals faulted the Chancellor's expansive interpretation and this legal argument as not supported by law or reason. The court stipulated that a basic common sense approach as understood by a reasonable consumer was what was required. With all the legal wranglings over these business signs, the Heaps had taken them down a while back. 6. What made this case especially unique, extremely bizarre, and particularly egregious, was the colossal size of the amount that the Chancellor sued for as damages. Although the amount claimed in the initial complaint by the Chancellor from the Heaps was much lower, this amount ballooned as time went on, up to a shocking amount of $67 million. Yes, $67 million. It bears repeating. For comparison, and to put it all in perspective, let's evaluate the three amounts together that you were earlier asked to remember. Consider that the dry cleaning bill for alteration of the disputed missing trousers was $10.50, and a potential replacement cost of a new suit was $1,150. Then compare these relatively modest figures with an oversized and massive damages amount of $67 million. The damages amount was later reduced by the Chancellor to $54 million, but still, the reduced damages amount remained extreme. All those tens of millions of dollars because of a disputed missing pair of trousers. Really inexplicable. Was there any proportionality at all for the Chancellor to bring such a gigantic claim, considering the initial modest amounts involved? Does the Chancellor's damages claim even begin to make any lick of sense to anyone else? It definitely did not make much sense to a lot of people at the time, but it raised many questions. For instance, what was the aim of such an immense damages amount brought by the Chancellor? Was it the financial ruin of small business owners like the Heaps, or were other factors at play? 7. The humongous damages claim figure of $67 million also called into question the legal basis of its calculation by the Chancellor, and how it was arrived at in the first place. In part, the Chancellor based his damages calculation on the local consumer protection law, which evidently provided for a $1,500 charge per violation, for so long that a violation continues. The Chancellor seemingly counted 12 separate violations. This later became 7 violations per day for each of the 3 Heaps business owners and operators, for more than 1,200 days, or however long, for when the alleged misleading business signs were up at Heaps dry cleaning, and for each day the disputed missing trousers were not returned. At the higher 12 violations number, and at $1,500 per violation, that became almost $65 million. The exorbitant damages amount claimed in this case brought into sharp focus whether the local consumer protection law in its bid to protect consumers unfairly put small business owners, in particular, like the Heaps, at the risk of possible atrocious outcomes as demonstrated here by the missing trousers case. 8. Whether the trousers at the heart of this case were even missing at all, became a heated point of debate. It emerged in court that shortly before the Chancellor dropped off the trousers at Heaps dry cleaners for alteration, the Chancellor's son had 2 to 3 months previously returned a couple of his father's suits that he had borrowed. The son testified in court that although he himself preferred cuffs on his trousers, none of his father's suit trousers had cuffs. coupled with the series of other trousers that the Chancellor had recently dropped off at Heap dry cleaners for alteration, the court concluded it was plausible that the trousers on the hanger with his blue and burgundy pinstriped jacket were not the trousers that matched the jacket, even if the Chancellor assumed that they were. The trial court found that the Chancellor, as the plaintiff, had not met his burden of proving that the trousers the Heaps attempted to return to him were not the trousers he brought in for alterations. The Chancellor's evidence did not, on balance, prove definitively that the disputed missing trousers that the Chancellor dropped off at Heaps dry cleaners were not the same trousers presented and sought to be returned by the Heaps as the found trousers of the Chancellor. In other words, the Chancellor did not prove that Heaps dry cleaners had actually lost his trousers, or that the trousers were in fact still missing. That is really farcical. This is especially so, considering the enormous financial hits, and heightened emotional and other strains, that the Heaps had to endure, together with the dramatic, and sometimes theatrical, turns that this case took, for trousers that possibly had been found all the while. The found trousers were apparently hung at the Heaps attorney's offices for most of the time that the case dragged on, although it was displayed to members of the news media at some point. 9. Other matters happening in the Chancellor's personal life may have also had a major and challenging impact on his state of mind, and possibly clouded his judgment, as to how he mostly managed the entire affair of the missing trousers case. That is, if the attitude exhibited by the Chancellor during the events of this case were unusual for him, and not his regular pattern of behavior. For instance, during the court trial, the Chancellor acknowledged that he had been in dire financial straits at the time the saga began. His credit was almost running out. He had also been required to pay his ex-wife's legal bills of about $12,000 in his divorce proceedings. The coincidence of this $12,000 amount with the $12,000 final settlement offer from the Heaps led to speculations whether the Chancellor was looking for a payday with this lawsuit to resolve his financial difficulties after his divorce. It was also reported that while explaining about the disputed missing trousers in his testimony during the court trial, the Chancellor broke down in tears due to the frustration he felt, such that the court had to take a recess. Since he represented himself in the court case as his own legal counsel, the Chancellor had to question himself, and he became quite emotional in the process. One never knows what will affect people, and to what extent, especially in moments of high emotions. Guess the breaking point for the Chancellor was this cherished pair of trousers that allegedly went missing, and all the strain that came with that. Who knew? It was also alleged that Heaps dry cleaners had previously lost another pair of the Chancellor's trousers in the past, for which the Chancellor was given a check of $150 for a new pair of trousers. Following this past incident, Heaps dry cleaners apparently did not want to accept business anymore from the Chancellor. The Chancellor, however, persisted as he reportedly said, among other things, that Heaps dry cleaners were the only dry cleaning store in the neighborhood, and he did not have a car to drive to another one. Could this past incident with Heaps dry cleaners, perhaps, have exacerbated and agitated matters and grievances in the Chancellor's mind, such that he went overboard with his reactions in the missing trousers case? 10. The missing trousers case received considerable widespread public reaction and attention, and led to the case being described, among other things, as a joke, a comedy, a nightmare, and a parody. The Chancellor received a lot of public condemnation and scorn for this case, since many people viewed it as a frivolous litigation, especially given the Chancellor's position as a law officer occupying a position of public trust. On the other hand, the Heaps received a lot of public support, and a fundraising drive undertaken for them was successful, and helped with some of their legal costs and lost business revenue. However, the emotional, financial, and other strain from the legal case probably contributed to the Heaps closing down 2 of their 3 dry cleaning stores, including the dry cleaning store location involved in the case. The Heaps also contemplated returning to their country of origin. Who can blame them for having this frame of mind? All in all, the missing trousers case led to public calls from many segments of society for law reform, and even from some sectors of the legal community, to address this kind of possibly frivolous, bad faith, unnecessary, vexatious, abusive, unreasonable, disproportionate, exorbitant, and excessive litigation being brought to American courts, or even being entertained by the United States legal system. The case challenged the integrity of the American lawsuit system, which has been plagued by outrageous and absurd litigations with claimants that seek life-changing payouts. 11. Details of the Chancellor's involvement in certain other possible, frivolous, judicial, or related proceedings emerged during the missing trousers case and in the years afterwards. It became known that the Chancellor was sanctioned $12,000 for unnecessary litigation and other things by the court in his divorce proceedings, at around the time the saga of the missing trousers case started. Also, following a district commission's decision not to reappoint him to his official position at his new job for his lack of appropriate judgment and judicial temperament in his handling of certain matters, the Chancellor sued for wrongful dismissal, but he lost the case. He then appealed to the Court of Appeals, and again lost his appeal. The Chancellor contended that the loss of his job was impacted, in part, by the missing trousers case. 15 years after the events of the missing trousers case started, the case came full circle, with professional action taken against the Chancellor in relation to his conduct in the case. Following a professional disciplinary proceeding by the Board of Professional Responsibility, the Chancellor was issued with a suspension from legal practice for 90 days. The basis for the suspension was violating rules of professional conduct by engaging in frivolous arguments not supported by facts or law, and interfering with the administration of justice. The Chancellor appealed the decision to the Court of Appeals, but the suspension was upheld. Wow, what a saga. Some people do like to sue, for anything and everything. You simply never know when you may come across very quarrelsome and litigious people, and what may set them off to go 100%, or more, on you. A lesson to be learned from the missing trousers case is that, while one may well be within their rights to bring certain lawsuits, it is best to take a measured approach, as it may not always be the wisest course of action to follow through, at all times, and bring each and every lawsuit. Let's know your perspective about the missing trousers case. What do you think about this case that led to an incredible and shocking $67 million court claim? Was this a frivolous litigation by the Chancellor against the heaps, in your perspective? Do you consider the damages amount to be outlandish? Or, do you empathize with the Chancellor's position? Do you think the Chancellor was justified in bringing the case? Did a couple of days' inconvenience of missing his trousers deserve such a massive compensatory and punitive damages claim? Was the law that was the basis for the lawsuit's damages claim itself reasonable or outrageous? Do share your comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to this channel, please subscribe. Do comment below, turn on the notification bell, and share this video. Thanks for your time with the Toray Perspectives channel. We reflect on different perspectives when navigating and handling various tricky and puzzling social interactions and life situations, which can bring the best and worst out of people.